I'm
Rawr.
angry about cats.
When did we all get this dumb?
Almost only counts in horseshoes, hand grenades, and nuclear warfare. I don't see any bodies, so it doesn't count.
I'm angry about cats.
I'm the chef. I want to hear one thing. Yes, chef.
Come on, man. Use your brain.
The Why I'm Angry podcast starts now.
Oh, man, that gets me going every time. The Why I'm Angry podcast starts here. We're here in the lovely Freestyle Man Cave studio. We got the flag waving behind me here, and to my right on the screen here, we've got Maugs here. We're coming to you as a special week. This is Memorial Day week. We got the weekend coming up. Everybody's got their things going on, trying not to shoot their hands off with the fireworks and all of that good stuff. They say that the firework accidents go up about 75% on patriotic weekends like 4th of July and Memorial Day. So try not to blow yourself up in some patriotic fashion. We want to have you around next week sometime. So, Moggs, what do you got for us?
All right. Well, first of all, I don't use fireworks. The closest I get to fireworks is my 70 birthday candles when I have my birthday. So
Oh,
stay away
man.
from those. So I'm safe for Memorial Day.
Make sure you
But,
got the fire extinguisher out, huh?
That's right. I stay away from those things. I'm too old to burn off my hand here, so I'm really careful. Uh, but Memorial Day is it's been interesting to me. It's a day where we all celebrate. We get a 3-day weekend. We go out. We go golfing. We have picnics. We celebrate with family. We have fun. But
Right.
I was thinking about it, and it's the only federal holiday that celebrates death. Now you can say that Easter does, but Easter, from a Christian perspective, really celebrates the resurrection or life from death.
Right.
So as a federal holiday, Memorial Day really commemorates those who have died. And
Right.
that's a kind of sobering thing. We're having all kinds of fun. We're celebrating. We have time off. We're doing kinds of things. But I thought, there's almost a sadness and almost a soberness of Memorial Day when we think about why we have this is really to commemorate those who have died for us to defend our country, and it is to recognize those lives that have been lost. Now,
True.
those of those who aren't a little confused between Memorial Day and Veterans Day is to celebrate all people who do serve in our armed services and have served in our armed services in the past. But Memorial Day is exclusively set aside for those who have died in the interests of our country. So that's a little bit different, and it's in some ways a much more uh, reverent type of holiday than most of the others we celebrate. So that's a little bit different
Right,
thing.
and I think we lose that a little bit. We've lost that in the whole revelry of we got the extra day off and we go out and we shoot the fireworks off and everything like that. And I think we and we go to find all of the soldiers and veterans that we can find, and we say Happy Memorial Day, and really it's more for the fact that we're memorializing those people who have given the ultimate sacrifice for us. And I think we do lose that sometimes, and I think it's good to kind of bring that back into our into perspective.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean we can't have fun on Memorial Day. We should celebrate, have fun with family and friends, and do things. But there's a time that we also need to take a step back and say this day is really for a specific purpose, and it is to really appreciate and honor those who have died for our freedoms that we celebrate now. And I was interested to find out that this whole thing about Memorial Day goes way back to the Civil War. I didn't know when it started, but it apparently started back kind of during the Civil War, where returning deceased soldiers were buried and their loved ones would place flowers and flags over their graves, just kind of spontaneously as a way of recognizing them and honoring them, commemorating their service. And that idea kind of caught fire. It kind of became popular on
Yeah.
both sides of the Mason-Dixon line. And actually, there was a story that even after the Civil War, a large group of freed slaves discovered a mass grave of Union soldiers of, say, 250, 257 Union soldiers who had died, buried in a mass grave. And these freed slaves then placed flowers and flags over these graves as a way of recognizing their bravery and their sacrifice. Now, that was nothing formal. That was just a spontaneous act of love and affection and appreciation for those who had died for their freedoms. So that's kind of, from what I understand at least, how this whole idea of Memorial Day started. And it really wasn't ever called Memorial Day at first. It was called Decoration Day.
Yeah, I
So
see that.
yeah, and I think some of us who go way way back remember, or at least can have heard people describe it as Decoration Day rather than Memorial Day. It wasn't called that until after World War II.
Wow. Yeah, and
So
it's kind of funny to hear like some of the traditions that we've had like my generation and that I've had for years or for all of our lives. We feel like it's been there forever, and it's really like it's not. And so some of us are just finding out like different like this Decoration Day didn't come until World War II, and we thought it was always or it was Decoration Day till World War II, and we thought it was always Memorial Day.
yeah, and it wasn't really, from what I understand, it really wasn't formalized uh, until 1866. And there was a guy in Waterloo, New York, 1866. He was a pharmacist. And he said, we really ought to set aside a time to honor the Civil War veterans who have died. So this city, Waterloo, New York, decided to take a day. People didn't go to work. They went to the cemeteries. They had a parade. They put flowers and flags on the cemeteries. And that is at least honored today as the birthplace of Memorial Day, is Waterloo, New York. And they're very proud of that title anyway. And then after that, uh, there was a lady, she was called Mary Ann Williams, and she was the Ladies Memorial Association. And she called really for a national holiday to honor those who had died in the Civil War. So those movements began very soon after the Civil War, because if you look at it in the Civil War, there were almost over 600,000 soldiers in both sides of the border, or on the Mason-Dixon line, who died in the Civil War. Huge number from both
Yeah.
combat and disease. So there was no small number of people who had died for their causes. So it was a huge event, and felt to be a very important event in the lives of the families who lost husbands and wives and sons and daughters, brothers and sisters. I don't think today we appreciate what a sense of loss and mourning people experienced those years after the Civil War. And that's what they wanted to commemorate. They wanted to remember those lives.
Right. And I think one thing we don't think about also with the Civil War is that we fought ourselves. It wasn't just, everybody that died on in the Civil War was an American body. It wasn't like we were over in World War II and it was all those guys over there that, all those Europeans or all those Germans or all those whatevers. then we can kind of somehow separate ourselves because we like to to separate ourselves in different kinds of people, and so we can dehumanize those people because those people weren't we were fighting against, but it was all of us were
Yes.
Americans in that battle. We were fighting ourselves, our brother, and like you said, it was between brothers and sisters, and or brothers and brothers against each other,
Yeah.
and sometimes even fathers and sons, and so it just really in this time of division, I think this is a really good time to remember that do we really does all of our division really matter so much that we want to continue to fight ourselves or each other? Do you really want to fight your family for this?
Mhm.
Because we've gone this path before, and we lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers because we were fighting ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if there's an undercurrent of value in this, it is that grief and mourning do bring people together.
Right.
So, as sad as it is to say, it is that experiences of life where we share in the loss of life of a person that we know, that we somehow are able to empathize with other people's loss. They empathize with our loss. And it does tend to bring people together in mourning and sacrifice. And that's one of the things that's it's valuable to remember, I think. So, and we haven't really got into the significance that we're kind of in the history of talking about Memorial Day right now. But later on in this podcast, we want to get into the significance of it. So let me share a couple of quick things and we'll move into that. But it's interesting to note that in the Civil War, it was estimated that over 620 100,000 soldiers died in that conflict. In World War II, there was only 405,000 soldiers, American soldiers who died. In World War One, there was only 116,000. I shouldn't say only, but there
Right.
were
Right.
116,000 soldiers who had died. And to give you some frame of reference, in the Vietnam War, there were 58,000 soldiers who had died. In the Korean War, it was 36,000. In the American Revolution, there were 25,000. It goes down from there from World War of 1812, Mexican American War, Spanish American War, and the Gulf War. But beyond the numbers, that just shapes the scope of the number of people, men and women, who have died to protect our freedoms. And as much as it is to talk about the numbers, to share that scope, uh, the significance of those deaths is what we celebrate on Memorial Day. And after World War One, uh, Decoration Day was moved from exclusively to honoring the Civil War soldiers who had died to include those of World War One, and after World War Two, it was extended to include all soldiers of all wars, and then it was changed to be entitled Memorial Day after World War Two. And it wasn't until uh, 1971 that it was actually declared by Congress as a federal holiday. So that's kind of the history of Memorial Day. But I think beyond the history and the numbers, we have to ask ourselves, why is it important to remember? I mean, these, as brave and as courageous as these people are, they're dead. They're gone.
Right.
Why is it important for our generations to remember their sacrifice? I wonder. Any thoughts? I mean, they're dead. They're
I
gone.
I mean the overwhelming thought that I have is that if we don't remember the past, we are doomed to relive it. That's the kind of the big overarching sentiment in why we hold on to the history of things, is that it is a good reminder of where we've been and why we don't want to go back there.
So what you're saying is it resensitizes us to the basic values that we hold as humans.
Right. I mean, I would think that if you celebrate those who had given the ultimate sacrifice, that you realize that there is an ultimate sacrifice to be given, and these people have given it. And if we go back to some of those days and some of those times, that could be called upon for us to give that sacrifice also.
Do you think that our country is prepared to do that, to give the ultimate sacrifice?
Less and less. I think there
Yeah.
are less and less people out there with the resolve, and I talk to people all the time about what if we can all talk a big game, but like we've kind of talked, I think I've said in a few other podcasts that you really don't know how strong or what you'll do until you're actually punched in the face, and you don't really know what you'll do until they come knocking at your door. And so, is your resolve really strong enough that or your convictions strong enough that you will stand up? I mean, George Washington and his brave units, went through the Delaware and about froze during the winter,
Mhm.
barely made it through that short, that winter time, and somehow resolved to lay siege, and just long enough that the French showed up and we could, actually take over. But he lost probably as many or more battles than he actually won.
Hmm.
And so, you
Yeah.
know, do we really have that resolve? I mean, we just talked about the, you basically came across with about 1.2 million people who died in battles over the last almost 200, a little over 200 years,
That's true.
and the we were so incensed about, we hit the 3,000 mark on deaths in the Afghanistan war. I mean, that was a good day of battling in the Civil War. I mean, if you go back to Gettysburg, I mean, we had almost 100,000 people laying dead on the battlefield at the end of the 5 or 6 days, of just battling. So, um, I mean, if you really get into that, I don't think our country really has that resolve that it used to. We've not that we've become soft, but we've become soft. That's
Well,
one
I
of those.
agree. Yeah, I agree 100%. I read a article not too long ago, Aaron, that said that contemporary young people, and I don't remember the ages, but they were losing faith. They subscribed less and less to the concept of religion, and the
Oh
other one
man,
was patriotism.
I'm going to talk
So,
about the religion one later on this in the
oh
next
yeah,
podcast. So
yeah. But in terms of patriotism, what we're talking about, now
right.
is why would people lose faith in patriotism? And sometimes I wonder if they think that patriotism is uh, doing what the overarching government wants you to do. So the president or the Congress or whatever says, we're going to go to war, you have to go do this. But really, patriotism, I don't think, is so much doing what the government tells you to do. It's protecting and it's defending the freedoms and the safety of those whom you love. Patriotism is uh, preserving the freedom for your husband, your wife, your kids, and your future. And if people could understand that patriotism isn't a badge that you wear that's assigned by following the government's subscriptions, but it's a way of honoring the and expressing the love that you have for your family and your friends and the future. So if people could look at patriotism a little bit in that light, I think maybe that would help them understand the value of sacrifice, even to the extent of their lives. I mean, you read the stories of some of these World War II veterans, and they went through literal hell when they went through these battles. And I can't imagine what they went through. You read some of the stories of what, and I don't think we appreciate that very much.
I mean, there's definitely a reason, and it's well earned that we call them the greatest generation. I mean, some of those guys, went off to war, came back, and then created all of this for us. That we don't really give them the credit. We look back to some of the bad things that have happened, and some of the things that have pushed into today, and maybe they weren't always they had become callous with things they had seen, but they created this world of actual freedom here in the U.S. They had made great strides into giving us at least a chance to get to start. I talked to some of them when I was traveling as a military memorabilia expert, and what was more gratifying to me than seeing the items was hearing the stories behind the items. And
Oh,
some of the guys, there's one that I always kind of gravitate back towards, and this he said he was a street kid. And back in the 40s, you could survive as a street kid. He was an orphan, and he didn't know who his parents were. Obviously, he kind of didn't really like the institution of orphanages, and so as soon as they let him out for the day, he would be out on the streets doing whatever he did, and getting into trouble and stuff like that. And he said at 15. He walked into a recruiting station, and they said, "How old are you?" And he said, "How old you got to be?" And he said, he goes, he told him, or they told him that they were going to give him 3 meals a day and a place to sleep. And he said, "That's a better deal than I've got right now. Sign
yeah,
me up."
yeah,
And so for 3 years of the military, he wasn't even old enough he was lying about his age to be there. And they turned him into an engineer and dropped him someplace randomly over Germany. He goes, "For about a month and a half, I was trying to find my unit. I had to wear civilian clothes, and I was walking around in
yeah,
towns that I had no clue where, like I couldn't speak the language." He goes,
yes,
"I'm like 16 and a half years old. I'm now an engineer, and
yeah,
with the Army Corps of Engineers and everything." And he goes, he's it was just it was for me, it was a sad, but it was also kind of an interesting and funny story, because he just, it was just a time where you just did what you had to do.
yeah. And to me, that's the whole. I shouldn't say the whole, but it is a major part of Memorial Day is remembering those stories. And we're not really good about remembering those stories. And I think that's sometimes when it's difficult to remember those stories, sometimes uh, symbols or icons of ideas can be very helpful. Uh, One of them, you're too young to remember this probably, but one of them was the red poppy. The red poppy flower was a symbol of those who had died first in World War One. And it came out of a poem you may have heard about called In Flanders Field. So in World War One, as you know, it was massacre after massacre after massacre. I think I think they said 1.8, no wait, I'll look it up. 8 million people died in World War One. Now that's not just soldiers, that's on both sides of the line, that's in all countries, that's from combat and disease. But it was a terrible war. But there was a colonel lieutenant, Canadian lieutenant, a Canadian lieutenant colonel that was a surgeon, and he was involved in patching up all these World War One soldiers that were so harmed. And he looked over the landscape, and he saw the trees and the foliage that were burnt and desiccated, the soil that was uplifted by bombs, and he saw a group of red poppies. This was 1915. So a group of red poppies arising from the broken soil. And he wrote this poem, I'll read it to you, called In Flanders Field. Have you ever heard of it before?
Yeah, I have. I actually
Okay.
just looked it up so that if you didn't get there, I would.
Okay. All right.
So
Well, I'll
yeah,
read
no,
it
that's
for your viewers, okay? Uh, and it's short. It's not very long, but it describes and reaching in verbally into those who are still alive. And it became very popular after World War One and led to the development or the popularity of the red poppy as being an emblem to wear on Memorial Day in honor to those who have died in World War One. So it's called In Flanders Field, and it was, let me credit it properly, it was by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, who was a Canadian brigade surgeon for the Allied Artillery Unit. And he wrote this poem looking over those broken fields and broken bodies. It's entitled In Flanders Field. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, beneath the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly scarcely heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from feeling hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. So it's an interesting story how that became very popular and led to the development of the red poppy as an emblem of those who died for us and are to be remembered. And there's a whole story behind how that got to be with a young lady who started that idea in Athens, Georgia, worked with the American Legion to develop that, and they would sell these red poppies for minimum amount, and they would use the funds then to help support the veterans from World War One. So the
well,
red poppy is an icon for us to remember those who have lost and gone before.
and I remember growing up, like my grandfather was part of the American Legion, and so we would go out to the cemetery, the farmer cemetery, and we would,
Oh, yeah,
find all of the veteran
sure.
tombstones, and then we would make sure they had a
Yeah,
little flag and had the
yeah,
little emblem on it
right.
for the right war that they were in. And then I remember that we would get a pin on our shirt that had a little American flag with the red flower. I don't think
Yeah,
I don't think they were actual poppies or they were real flowers. I think
they're
they were
like,
paper. They were paper flowers or something like
yeah,
that. But
yeah,
I do remember that growing up.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I think the last time that I really remember going out and doing something like that was I was in my teens, you know,
Yeah,
and I think that's a sad statement.
it is.
That the last 20 years I probably have been out to, I probably have maybe been to one Memorial Day
Yeah.
event or program, and I think it was either when I was in college or even when I was traveling and just happened
Yeah.
by one. It wasn't even like, you know, that I meant to be there or anything like that. So I do think
And
that's a
yeah, but we can still remember without being there at the cemetery. I think the problem with it is if we don't go to the cemetery and see the graves, put the flag on the veterans' grave and remember them, then if we don't do that, then we forget everything. We don't then take the time to do what we could do too, and that is honor them from our home. You know, we can watch on TV the events where they put the wreath on the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington National Cemetery. We can watch those types of things. We can think about our uh, our family who died in the wars. You know, my dad's brother died in Belgium in World War II. He's a paratrooper, fought in Battle the Bulge, and I can remember when we went to Italy, going to a military cemetery for the Allies, northern Italy, row after row after row of white crosses. I mean, it was, uh, you couldn't say anything. It was just, you were just humbled by the number of people who laid beneath those crosses. And it was just confounding. So you can still use, though we may not be at our local cemetery, but we can
right.
still remember. And the other thing is, um, in that memory, we can still honor not only our own family members, but other family members too. So I think the biggest thing is remembering and honoring those who have died and preserving our liberties and our safety in whatever way we can, you know. But I read something that I didn't know. I'm embarrassed to say this, but they said that part of Memorial Day was a moment of silence at 3 p.m. in the afternoon.
Hmm.
Now, I that that is apparently is a well-known thing, but I had never heard that before, so I'm embarrassed to say that. But I think this Memorial Day, I would like to take a moment or two at 3 p.m. in the afternoon to just pause and reflect on those people who had died for me, for my
Yeah.
freedoms, and that. So,
Yeah, that would be a great kind of, you know, statement, you know, to wherever you are, wherever we're at, is to just, you know, take that moment and, you know, maybe not change anything so that where you're at, it makes more of a statement, so that, you know, if you're at your barbecue or if you're at your family's get together or whatever, that you take that moment at 3 o'clock and just, you know, just take that minute to, you know, take a moment of silence and remember those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice for your freedoms that you have today.
yeah, on that memory, you know, people say, well, what good does it do? Well, it doesn't do any good for those who have died. But you have to ask yourself, if I am willing to pause my life, put my life on pause for a while, to reflect upon those who have died for me, doesn't that do something to me? I mean, doesn't that help me be more sensitive not only to their loss and their death, but to other people's struggles, their sacrifices? Maybe not to the death, but the struggles that they're going through. Doesn't that in some way warm my heart, soften my soul, help me appreciate the difficulties that other people go through? Uh, so I think that remembrance of giving up your life for a cause, for your family and friends, because you love them does something good for us as people that we could do well to do more often. And I think that's really where remembrance is important. I mean, you look at, if you go back to the Old Testament and the New Testament, in the Old Testament, the Israelites would fight a battle, and after the battle, if they were victorious, they would build a altar of stone. And that altar of stone was, first of all, to honor the Lord from bringing them victorious through the battle, but also that altar of stone was to remember those who have died in the battle. And if you look at the word remember in the Old and New Testament, it's mentioned like 200 or 300 times. There's
Wow.
something important for us remembering not only those who we've lost, but the preciousness of life, the tenderness of life, the temperance of life, the fleetingness of existence, and an appreciation for every moment and every day the Lord gives us to live. So that whole idea of remembrance and memory goes far beyond Memorial Day. And I think we could maybe be wise to incorporate that more into our everyday remembrances of how we conduct ourselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's good. I I really don't have a whole ton to add to that. I think that's maybe where we leave that with just the wisdom of that remember those things that have come before us to give us that we build our wisdom on, and I think that's kind of
Yeah.
where we're at on it.
Yeah, it's I remember I want to share one more thing. And I remember reading the book Band of Brothers by Stephen Ambrose. And and for those of you who are not familiar with it, Aaron's readers or listeners, the Band of Brothers is a company, I guess, of American soldiers in World War II who went through uh, D-Day and went through Germany, lost a lot of soldiers. And Ambrose describes this in his book. And there's an event that occurs where a young soldier goes out on patrol. He gets hit by shrapnel, young kid. The shrapnel goes through his helmet into his brain, and he's rescued and brought back. And he says, "Just kill me. The pain, the searing pain, I can't stand anymore. Just put me away." They didn't, but he soon died in the arms of one of his co soldiers. A good friend of him wrote a phrase that has stuck with me for a long time. And he says, I know that in the States, there are people who are going to cocktail parties and people who are saying, we need to shift the funds from the military back to our commercial machines to help build up our economy. So we need to shift this money away from the military. And he laments, and with sadness, he says these words. I'll read them to you. He says, and he's describing his friend who had died. He says, he wasn't 20 years old. He hadn't begun to live. And we wondered if the people back home would ever know what it costs the soldiers in terror and hideous, agonizing deaths to win the war. That's in the Band of Brothers, chapter 14 in the Kindle version. So to me, those words really hit me to realize that we don't have a clue
Right.
what those people, those brave, sacrificial people, have gone through for our freedoms. But we
Right.
should honor them, and we should
Exactly.
value them, and we should
Yep.
remember them. I don't know how close we are to wrapping things up, but I would like to close with something that's been very important to me.
Yeah.
Did there anything else you wanted to go through, Aaron?
I think you've wrapped it up eloquently. I think we're ready to kind of close it off. So
Okay,
whatever you've
this is
got is
for me. For me, this is a perfect ending. I say it because it's been so touching to my life, and this is a letter that actually was sent out by James Dobson in a newsletter to his subscribers. And it goes back to, I think, 1994. But it touched me so much that I kept it.
yeah.
And it describes a Major Ballou in the Civil War. He's a Union major, and he writes this letter to his wife. And it's such a touching description of those who've died for us that I think it'd be a fitting ending maybe to what we're talking about tonight. So this letter is about a week before the Battle of Bull Run in the Civil War. That was fought in July of 1861. And the letter says, "My very dear Sarah, the indications are very strong that we shall move in a few days, perhaps tomorrow. Lest I should not be able to write again, I feel impelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eye when I shall be no more. I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how strongly American civilization now leans on the triumph of the government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence could break. And yet my love for country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly on with all these chains to the battlefield. The memories of all the blissful moments I have spent with you come creeping over me, and I feel most deeply grateful to God and you that I have enjoyed them so long, and how hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes the hopes of future years, when, God willing, we might still have lived and loved together and seen our sons grown up to honorable manhood around us. If I do not return, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I love you, and when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults and the many pains I have caused you. How thoughtless, how foolish I have oftentimes been. Oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those they loved, I shall always be near you in the gladdest day and in the darkest night, amidst your happiest scenes and the gloomiest hours. Always, always. And if there be a soft breeze upon your cheek, it shall be my breath. Or the cool air cools your throbbing temple, it shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me dead. Think I am gone, and wait for me, for we shall meet again. Sullivan. Major Ballou, who wrote that letter, was killed 1 week later in the first battle of Bull Run. And one has to wonder whether he whispered the name of his wife Sarah with his last breath. So that's what I have to share, and I think it's a touching conclusion for us to remember on Memorial Day.
Remember to follow, like, and share the Why I'm Angry podcast across all social media platforms and anywhere you get your podcast. The Why I'm Angry podcast ends now.